The sharp crack of a rifle echoes through the night. A target drops instantly, never realizing where the bullet came from. From a shadowed rooftop, a man watches, his eyes cold and unshaken. He snaps shut the case holding his weapon, vanishes into the rain-slicked streets, and leaves nothing behind but silence. This is his present, a former soldier who once fought for his country, now taking lives for money. But to understand how he reached this point, we must look back. Soldiers are trained to defend, to fight for honor and ideals. But what happens when the war ends, when the world moves on, and the soldier is left alone with scars too deep to heal? When survival demands choices that blur the line between duty and damnation? Tonight you will follow the journey of a man who once swore never to kill again, yet found himself turning vengeance into law and becoming an executioner in the shadows. Before the contracts, before the blood money, there was a soldier who wanted nothing more than peace. He had worn the uniform with pride, serving in distant lands where the air was heavy with smoke and fear. He carried out missions that demanded both precision and sacrifice, and though he survived, not all of him made it back. Home was supposed to be a sanctuary, but instead of quiet nights and restful mornings, he found himself haunted by the echo of gunfire in his head. Dreams became battlegrounds, and every face he saw reminded him of comrades who never came home. The world outside moved on quickly, jobs, families, celebrations. Yet for him, each day was a reminder that war had carved something into his soul that could never be erased. Bills piled up, jobs slipped away, and with them, his sense of purpose. A soldier without a war is a man adrift, and he began to realize that the only thing he truly knew, better than anyone else, was how to fight and how to kill. The weight of unpaid bills pressed harder than any combat mission he'd ever faced. The landlord knocking on the door, the bank threatening foreclosure, and whispers of collectors willing to break more than bones if he didn't pay. Everywhere he turned, the ghosts of his past marched beside him. The memory of fallen brothers, the promises he couldn't keep, the family he'd already disappointed. War had left scars, but civilian life was cutting deeper. That's when the man appeared, well-dressed, calm, with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He offered a drink, a seat, and a proposition. Not charity, not pity, but a job. A single night's work for enough cash to wipe out months of debt. The instructions were simple. One name, one address, one bullet. You were trained for this, the stranger said. Why let your talent rot in the gutter when it can save your life? It wasn't supposed to be permanent. Just one job, one pull of the trigger, one sin to buy a little peace. But sins have a way of multiplying, and that first contract would not be his last. The night of the job came faster than he expected. Rain poured over the city, masking footsteps and shadows. He positioned himself across the street, heart pounding, rifle steady. It felt just like combat, except this time there was no flag, no mission for freedom, no brotherhood waiting at his side. Only money. Through the scope, he saw the target, a man laughing over dinner, glass of wine raised high. He didn't look like a threat. He looked ordinary. And that was the moment the soldier realized what he was truly about to do. This wasn't war, this was execution. His finger trembled on the trigger. Memories of fallen comrades whispered in his mind. For a second, he almost walked away. But then he thought of the bills, the collectors, and the chance to finally silence the chaos in his life. The shot rang out. A window shattered. The man fell, and with him, so did the soldier's last tie to who he once was. That night he crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and once the blood money hit his hands, there was no going back. After the first job, he swore to himself there would be rules. If he was going to keep killing, he had to draw lines in the sand, lines that made him feel less like a monster and more like a soldier on a mission. Rule number 1, no families. Rule number 2, no children. It was his way of convincing himself that morality still existed in this world of shadows. He told himself he wasn't a butcher. He was selective, disciplined. A killer, yes, but a killer with a code. For a while, it worked. Contracts came, names were given, payments delivered. He executed with precision, cold efficiency. To outsiders, he was invisible, just another face in a crowded street. To those who knew his reputation, he became a ghost whispered about in hushed tones. But codes are fragile, and in the world of blood money, rules are meant to be broken. It was only a matter of time before someone tested how far his honor could truly stretch. At first, the contracts seemed random. Business rivals, gang leaders, corrupt officials. But the more jobs he accepted, the more a pattern began to emerge. The names weren't chosen by chance. Each death shifted power, opened doors, cleared the path for someone else's gain. He started to notice familiar signatures on the payments, the same organizations circling back with new requests. It wasn't about revenge or justice. It was business. Cold, calculated business, with lives as currency. Every bullet he fired fattened the pockets of men who never got their hands dirty. He was the weapon, the disposable piece, while they pulled the strings from comfortable offices and penthouses. The realization gnawed at him. He had traded the chains of war for new chains, this time bound by greed and manipulation. He was no longer fighting for survival. He was fueling an empire built on blood. And deep down he knew, if he wanted out, he would have to turn his sights on the very people signing his paychecks. The nights became unbearable. Sleep was no longer a refuge, but a battlefield where ghosts marched endlessly. Faces of the fallen, targets, comrades, innocents, blended into one long nightmare. Every time he closed his eyes, the screams came back. He tried drowning it in alcohol, numbing it with pills, but nothing silenced the pounding in his head. The man who once marched with discipline and honor now stumbled through life with shaking hands and hollow eyes. Flashbacks blurred the line between past and present. The crack of gunfire in his memory made him reach for weapons that weren't there. A car backfiring felt like an ambush. Even silence terrified him, because in silence he heard his own guilt louder than ever. The soldier was gone. What remained was a broken shell, an assassin whose mind was unraveling with every trigger pulled, and he knew that sooner or later his fractured psyche would make him dangerous, not just to others, but to himself. Just when he thought the contracts had swallowed him whole, a new figure appeared. Unlike the others, this contact didn't move like a gangster or a crime boss. He was polished, careful, with the kind of knowledge only someone inside the system could possess. The man never gave a real name, only fragments of information, half-truths wrapped in promises. "I can get you out of this life," he whispered. "One final job, and you'll disappear forever." But his eyes betrayed something else: calculation. This wasn't about freedom. This was about control. The soldier-turned-assassin realized he was being steered, pushed toward targets that mattered more than money: political figures, high-value names, deaths that reshaped entire power structures. The mystery deepened with every meeting. Who was this man really working for? Was he a handler from the government using him as a ghost asset? Or was he simply another predator in the food chain, hiding behind a suit and a smile? One thing was clear: trusting him could mean salvation, or the deadliest trap yet. The next assignment felt different from the start. The target wasn't a rival gangster or corrupt businessman. It was someone clean, almost too clean. The details were vague, the payment unusually high. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary job. He studied the dossier carefully. The patterns didn't add up. The routines were predictable, the security almost laughable. It was as if the target had been placed in plain sight, waiting to be struck. And that's when he understood. This wasn't a contract. It was bait. Someone wanted him exposed, wanted him to pull the trigger so the trap could spring shut. For the first time he hesitated, not because of morality, but because he smelled the setup. He adjusted his scope, his breathing steady, but his mind sharper than ever. If they thought he was just a pawn to be sacrificed, they had underestimated the soldier in him. He would play their game, but this time he would be the one writing the rules. The night unfolded with surgical precision, just not his. As he moved into position, the city seemed too quiet, the streets too empty. He knew the signs. He'd walked into ambushes before. Only this time he was the prey. The moment he raised his rifle, Headlights flared from every direction. Engines roared. Shadows surged from alleyways, weapons drawn. The so-called target vanished like smoke, confirming what he already knew. He had been set up. Gunfire ripped through the silence. He dove for cover, instincts snapping into place. Every corner became a battlefield. Every bullet aimed to erase him, not protect anyone else. They weren't just hunting an assassin. They were hunting a man who knew too much. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. He had survived war zones. He knew how to disappear, how to strike back from the shadows. By the time the smoke cleared, the hunters were on the ground, and the soldier walked away with more questions than answers. This was no longer about contracts or money. It was war. And for the first time in years, he almost felt alive again. As he pieced together the fragments, phone numbers, coded messages, payments routed through shell companies, the truth began to crystallize. Every contract, every name, every bullet he fired had been part of something far larger than himself. He wasn't choosing targets. He was clearing a board. Someone had been moving him like a chess piece, eliminating rivals, silencing witnesses, shifting power into invisible hands. The mysterious contact hadn't been offering him freedom. He'd been tightening the leash. The debts, the desperation, even the timing of that first offer, none of it had been coincidence. From the very beginning, he had been manipulated into becoming the perfect weapon, disposable, efficient, untraceable. The realization hit harder than any battlefield wound. He wasn't just an assassin for hire. He was a pawn in a war he never agreed to fight. And now, with the mask pulled away, only one thought remained. If they had turned him into a weapon, then he would become the weapon against them. Something inside him snapped. The soldier who once killed out of duty, the assassin who once killed for money, was gone. What remained was vengeance, raw, merciless, and unstoppable. He no longer cared about the payout, the promises, or the so-called rules of the underworld. The men who had orchestrated his downfall, who had used his skills to build empires soaked in blood, had written their own death sentences. But vengeance is a double-edged blade. With every plan he drew, with every name he etched onto his list, he asked himself, was this justice, or was he becoming the very monster he despised? The line blurred quickly. He could feel the fire inside him burning hotter than reason. His targets weren't just enemies anymore. They were symbols of everything that had poisoned his life. He loaded his weapons with one final thought echoing in his mind. This isn't business. This is personal. And tonight, I don't miss. The trail led him to the top floor of a glass tower, a fortress of steel, money, and arrogance. Behind those doors waited the man who had orchestrated everything, the handler, the puppet master, the one who had turned a soldier into a contract killer. The room was lavish, drowning in wealth stolen through blood. And there he was, calm as ever, sipping whiskey like he had been expecting this meeting all along. "You were always predictable," the mastermind said with a smug grin. "A broken soldier desperate for purpose, I gave you that. Without me, you're nothing." The assassin's grip tightened on the weapon, but he held back. He didn't want to just kill him. He wanted him to know. To feel the weight of every life ruined, every string pulled from the shadows. "You made me a weapon," he growled. "Now you'll see what happens when the weapon turns on its master." The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of his heart pounding. In that moment, there were no debts, no contracts, only justice. Just as he prepared to deliver the final shot, the mastermind slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs, documents, recordings, evidence tying every assassination directly to him. Not to the puppet master, to him. Bank transfers under his name, fake witness statements placing him at crime scenes, carefully planted trails of blood and lies. If released, the world would see him not as a soldier betrayed, but as nothing more than a ruthless murderer. But buried deep in the folder was something else, proof of the conspiracy. Names of politicians, CEOs, syndicates, all connected, all complicit, enough to burn the empire to the ground. The realization struck like a bullet. This wasn't just about vengeance. This was about choice. He could destroy the man in front of him and vanish into the shadows, letting the world remember him as a killer. Or he could use the evidence, risk everything, and expose the truth. For the first time in years, the soldier saw a glimpse of redemption. But redemption carried a price, and the trigger was still in his hands. The room felt heavy, as if the walls themselves waited for his decision. His finger rested on the trigger, yet for the first time the weight of choice was heavier than the weapon itself. He could end it right here, deliver the bullet that vengeance demanded. No jury, no prison, no delay. Justice in its rawest, bloodiest form. And for a heartbeat, he wanted it more than anything. But then he remembered the faces, his brothers in arms, the innocents caught in the crossfire, and the promise he once made to never cross certain lines. Killing the mastermind would silence one man. Exposing him could shatter the entire empire. Slowly, he lowered the gun. "This isn't about me anymore," he muttered. "It's about the truth." He walked away, folder in hand, leaving the puppet master alive, but defeated. For the assassin, it wasn't mercy. It was strategy. Sometimes vengeance wasn't a bullet. Sometimes it was letting a man rot while the world watched his empire crumble. And in that choice, he found something he never expected, the faint taste of forgiveness for himself. In the days that followed, the folder became a weapon sharper than any blade, louder than any gun. Names fell, empires collapsed, and the world finally glimpsed the shadows that had been pulling its strings. Headlines called him many things: killer, vigilante, traitor, hero. But none of those labels truly defined him. He had paid in blood, in nightmares, in years of a life he could never reclaim. The price of his soul had already been collected long before the first trigger was pulled. Yet in exposing the truth, he left behind something that no amount of money or power could buy: a legacy. He vanished as ghosts often do. No goodbye, no trail. Some say he found peace in some distant corner of the world. Others whisper that he still walks the streets at night, watching, waiting, making sure no one else suffers the same chains he once wore. For him, the war was never about nations, contracts, or vengeance. It was about redemption, and though the scars would never fade, he had finally proven one thing to himself: even a man forged into a weapon could choose what kind of legacy to leave behind.